Chances are, if you've looked up in the sky at least once in your life, you've seen a cloud. They might be those puffy white things that just seem to float in the sky without a care in the world, or they might be those menacing dark storm clouds that look like they're about to dump the ocean onto your head. But what are clouds exactly, and what are some of the different types of them? Now, before we get into that, I would appreciate if you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for future content. Okay, so before we get into the various types of clouds, we need to understand what a cloud is. In short, a cloud is basically a ton of really tiny water droplets packed together. How does that happen? Well, during the day, water will evaporate from rivers, streams, lakes, and the ocean due to the heat of the sun. This water vapor will rise until it cools to a temperature where it can condense into liquid, a temperature that will vary depending on the humidity of the air, the time of day, and the temperature of the air itself. Now, the water doesn't just condense into sheets that fall back down to the planet immediately. Instead, they condense into tiny droplets that are able to be carried by air currents. When enough of these droplets cluster together, it makes a cloud. These droplets can continue to accumulate until they become heavy enough to fall back to the surface, either in the form of rain, snow, sleet, or hail, depending on the exact conditions at the time. Either that, or the cloud fails to really get going, again due to the temperature and time of day, and it quickly evaporates back into water vapor. Interestingly enough, clouds don't necessarily have to be made of water, as they can be made of really any gas that is able to condense in large quantities. As a result, the gas giants of the outer solar systems have very thick atmospheres made pretty much entirely of clouds, with Uranus and Neptune in particular having clouds made almost entirely of methane. Saturn's moon Titan takes the methane thing one step further, boasting not only methane clouds but an entire water cycle of lakes, rivers, and clouds that are made out of liquid methane. So, returning back to Earth, what are some of the major types of clouds? Well, let's start with that puffy cloud that everyone thinks of when they're presented with the word cloud. Scientifically, they're known as cumulus clouds, which is Latin for heap. Again, these clouds are usually pretty small, small enough in that almost all circumstances they can't produce precipitation on their own. Over time, however, these clouds can grow and grow as they continue to accumulate moisture, and this eventually leads into what's known as a cumulonimbus cloud, which is Latin for heaped rainstorm. As you can probably tell from that translation, these are your typical storm clouds, big enough to produce not only precipitation, but also the electrical currents associated with thunder and lightning. Unlike cumulus clouds, which usually aren't that big or voluminous, cumulonimbus clouds can be absolutely massive. Air currents will quite often carry the condensing water vapor upwards to staggering heights, in some cases extending into the stratosphere, which is the second layer of Earth's atmosphere and one that generally doesn't see as much activity as the troposphere below it. As a result, these clouds are one of the only types of clouds that cause significant disruption to planes at cruising altitude, as the chaotic precipitation and wind patterns can cause some pretty severe turbulence, which in extreme cases can actually be dangerous to the people on board the plane. As a result, if thunderstorms or other extreme weather is projected along a plane's flight path, the pilot will almost always divert around the bad weather unless it's absolutely necessary. Okay, now let's talk about a type of cloud that isn't nearly as flashy and is really more the hallmark of a cold, gray, and gloomy day than anything else. These clouds are known as stratus clouds, with stratus roughly translating to the word layer, which is pretty accurate when you realize what these clouds actually are. Unlike the puffiness of the cumulus and cumulonimbus clouds, stratus clouds are relatively flat and featureless, and hang relatively low to the ground. These clouds form in a slightly different manner, as they come about when air currents lift already humid air off the ground and forces that air to condense at a low altitude. In a sense, these clouds are essentially fog, but off the ground, and in many cases, they are literally fog that is just beginning to lift. These clouds usually produce light precipitation at most, either in the form of drizzling rain or spitting snowflakes. Fog itself is a little bit different from an actual cloud, in that while it is made from the same condensed droplets, they are one, pretty much on the ground, and two, they're quite often generated from something nearby, like a river or lake. The last major type of cloud I want to cover is in some ways the complete opposite of the stratus clouds I just covered. They're known as cirrus clouds, which translates to hairy, a translation that once again makes sense when you see what these clouds actually are: long and feather-like strands of clouds that form incredibly high up in the atmosphere. These clouds are notable because while they are pretty much never able to produce precipitation themselves, they are often a harbinger of worse weather to come. This is because they can easily form from thunderstorms and even hurricanes as the water vapor within them ascends to altitudes comparable to and even above the cruising altitude of a plane. This causes the water vapor to freeze into tiny ice crystals, which can spread extremely far from the storm itself. Because cirrus clouds are made from ice crystals, the interaction of low-level sunlight with these clouds can cause some incredibly interesting optical phenomena to form. Perhaps the most interesting of which, in my opinion, is the halo, which gives the appearance of a circle of light around the sun. These phenomena actually form in a somewhat similar manner to rainbows, as light is refracted in a very specific way when it interacts with the ice crystals in a cirrus cloud. However, thanks in part to the fact that we're dealing with ice instead of liquid water, they form a circle around the sun itself instead of opposite it, and they usually aren't as colorful as an actual rainbow is. Overall, clouds in general are surprisingly unique and varied, with numerous different types that can be so different from each other, it's hard to believe that they're all technically the same thing. And that's all I have to say about clouds. As always, I'd appreciate you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for future content. Thanks and have a great day.